Well, a day after the Sensex nosedived to register its biggest percentage fall in nearly 2 years and the rupee touched an all-time high, 62 to the dollar, worries about the fragile state of the Indian economy continue to concern corporate India. The lack of international confidence in India at the moment and the government's desperate efforts to stem the outflow of dollars is perhaps the biggest concern. Joining us now to explain her worries at this state of the economy, Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, the CMD of Biocon India Limited. Thanks very much, ma'am, for being with us. I know our forex reserves are much better now than what they were in 1991, but do you believe that the sense of a crisis that we felt back then is similar to what we are feeling now?
You're absolutely right, Vishnu. Everyone often talks about it as 1991 revisited. And, personally, I really believe that this is a result of just not doing things in a timely manner. It's about political complacency. It's about the bureaucracy kind of stepping in and taking charge of things, and, which has really led to a situation where, as we all know, once bureaucracy takes control, things slow down. And we've converted the license Raj into an approval Raj. And, bureaucracy is never one to get things done. And we are suddenly seeing a flurry of, politicians wanting to correct the situation, but it's too late. There's a saying, as you sow, so shall you reap. And UPA 2's poor showing is because of poor sowing. That's what's happening today.
Ma'am, the core issue is investor confidence, and with the RBI's recent measures on capital control making it more difficult for foreign investors to pull out their money from India, how soon do you think investors will actually return to this country?
What we are seeing today is knee-jerk reactions to every possible aspect of the financial crisis. So today we are facing a huge challenge in terms of foreign currency reserves. We are seeing the current account deficit widening. Why? Because, the import-export ratio has totally changed. And we are suddenly seeing a slew of measures being taken which are irrational and which are sort of knee-jerk reactions to the present crisis, which is actually adding to investor confidence woes. Basically, there is a further decline in investor confidence because of this.
But ma'am, are you concerned that coalition governments going into the future will inevitably result in poor economic governance, that there is no economic governance and stability now, and there is no guarantee that with further coalition governments, assuming that that's what happens in the future, that this would continue to suffer?
Vishnu, the way I look at it, this economy is now over-governed. Why? Because the bureaucracy have decided to take charge of the economy. And once that happens, and when you don't have strong political will and political leadership, making sure that you have that balance between regulation and implementation of policies, then you are going to be in this situation. Today, it's not a question of economic governance in a very larger sense, because today we've got a lack of policies, a lack of economic policies, a lack of economic reforms, and a lack of implementation of even existing policies. There is too much of flip-flopping of policies. There is not enough of timely implementation of policies. That's the situation right now. It's really not about misgovernance or lack of governance. I think there's over-governance or over-regulation which is really defeating all that we're trying to do today. We have to start relying more on pragmatic policies. Today there's lack of political will and political leadership to take bold economic policy decisions. And I'm glad to see that the Prime Minister has at last intervened and basically overruled FIPB and DIPP in just at least the pharma sector in terms of FDI. But it's a bit too late. We should have seen stronger political leadership. Wherever there was over-regulation, there should have been the political will to step in and correct it. But we haven't seen that. We've allowed the judiciary to answer questions when they shouldn't have been involved at all. We've seen the bureaucrats just step back very conveniently when they didn't want to take certain decisions, and politicians have just, totally stepped out of the sphere altogether.
But let me ask you this, since we need to look at the macro climate as well, and I take the points that you're mentioning about the situation at home, the lack of governance at so many levels, the lack of policy making. But how much will the stabilization of the US economy affect things in India? Because there is a real concern that the more stable things become in the US, the worse it would be for us in terms of trade flows.
Well, the global economy is very dependent on the stability of the US economy, which is a good thing. And personally, I believe that India actually can capitalize out of a very stable US economy, because actually our exports, given the weak rupee, can actually become very competitive globally. But again, we need to make sure that we support our export industry. We also need to make sure that the domestic industry is also basically supported by ensuring that at least we curb imports where you have domestic industry capable of filling that gap. But I don't think we are doing this in a judicious way. I think the export incentives, which should have actually been increased, have not happened. When you look at your new SEZ policies, what is so great? This was an ideal opportunity to actually, look at the SEZ policies, which, long need change and reforms and to be boosted. Instead of that, you sort of announce just a handful of very meek measures, which doesn't really kickstart the SEZ sector at all.
Right.
Then you have the various other economic opportunities and policies to enunciate. You don't do anything about that either. So how are you going to basically take advantage of a weak rupee?
Sure. Well, Ms. Shaw, very strong words from you over there on what you believe is the crisis in the Indian economy. A lot of people would say that actually it's not as big a crisis as we are making it out to be. You certainly believe that that is the case. It is a real crisis at this stage, but and uncertain really on the road ahead. Thanks very much, ma'am, for joining us and sharing those views.